The Tonight Show stage glowed under bright lights as Frank Sinatra stood at the microphone, his voice filling Studio 6B with the smooth sounds of My Way. Johnny Carson sat at his desk, smiling at the legendary performance unfolding before millions of viewers. But suddenly, mid-verse, Sinatra's voice cracked. His eyes fixed on someone in row 7 of the studio audience. The music continued, but the chairman of the board had gone completely silent. Carson's smile froze. The audience shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Sinatra's hand gripped the microphone stand until his knuckles turned white, his face draining of color as he stared at a man in a worn military jacket sitting quietly in the 7th row. "Ladies and gentlemen," Sinatra whispered, his voice barely audible over the orchestra. "Stop the music. Before we dive into what happened next, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss stories like this. Drop a comment telling us your favorite Frank Sinatra song. Now, let's see what made the great Frank Sinatra stop mid-performance on live television." It was May 1976, and The Tonight Show starring Johnny Carson was the most watched program in America. Getting Frank Sinatra to perform was considered a television event. The chairman of the board rarely made TV appearances anymore, preferring his Vegas residencies and exclusive concerts. But Johnny Carson had a special relationship with Sinatra, built on years of mutual respect and countless favors exchanged in the entertainment world. That night's taping was supposed to be magical. Sinatra had agreed to perform 3 songs and sit for an interview, something he almost never did anymore. Studio 6B at NBC's Burbank headquarters was packed with 200 lucky audience members who'd waited months for tickets. Network executives filled the back rows, knowing this episode would deliver massive ratings. Frank Sinatra, at 60 years old, still commanded a room like no one else. His blue eyes could charm or intimidate with equal ease. He'd performed for presidents, married movie stars, and built an entertainment empire that included records, films, and exclusive nightclubs. His reputation was legendary, both for his incredible talent and his fierce loyalty to friends and family. The man in row 7 was different from the usual Tonight Show audience. While others wore their best outfits, hoping to be noticed on camera, he sat quietly in a faded green military jacket. His hair was gray at the temples, his face weathered by time and hardship. His name was Tom Richardson, and he had a story that connected to Sinatra in ways the audience couldn't imagine. Tom had served in World War II, part of the 82nd Airborne Division that parachuted into Normandy on D-Day. He'd survived the war, but came home to find life difficult. Jobs were hard to keep, memories were harder to forget, and the country that welcomed him back as a hero didn't always know how to help him adjust to civilian life. By 1976, Tom was living in a small apartment in North Hollywood, working odd jobs to make ends meet. His daughter, Sarah, worked as a production assistant at NBC. She'd spent 6 months trying to get tickets to The Tonight Show for her father, knowing he loved Frank Sinatra's music. Those songs had helped Tom through dark nights overseas and difficult days back home. When Sarah finally secured tickets for the Sinatra taping, her father cried. The first time she'd seen him cry since her mother's funeral 3 years earlier. Tom sat in row 7, seat 12, his hands folded in his lap as the show began. He watched Johnny Carson deliver his monologue, laughed at Ed McMahon's jokes, and waited patiently for the moment Frank Sinatra would take the stage. When the orchestra began playing and Sinatra walked out in his perfectly tailored tuxedo, Tom felt something stir in his chest, a mixture of joy and sadness that only music could trigger. The performance had started perfectly. Sinatra's voice filled the studio with "Come Fly With Me," and the audience clapped along with genuine enthusiasm. Johnny Carson watched from his desk, tapping his pencil to the rhythm, his face showing the satisfaction of a host who knew he was delivering great television. After the first song, Sinatra chatted briefly with Carson, telling a funny story about Dean Martin and a misunderstanding at the Sands Hotel in Las Vegas. The audience laughed, and Carson set up the next performance with his usual smooth professionalism. "Ladies and gentlemen, here's Frank Sinatra performing My Way." The orchestra began the familiar introduction, and Sinatra stepped back to the microphone. This song had become his signature, an anthem about living life on your own terms, facing the end without regrets. He'd performed it thousands of times, but each performance carried emotional weight that audiences felt deep in their hearts. As Sinatra sang the opening verses, Tom Richardson sat forward in his seat. This song meant something special to him. During the war, when things got tough, when friends didn't make it home, Tom had promised himself that if he survived, he'd live life fully and honestly. My Way captured that feeling perfectly. But as Sinatra reached the second verse, something changed. His eyes swept across the audience, a habit from decades of performing. Most performers looked over the crowd, not really seeing individuals. But Sinatra always noticed details: a woman crying, a man mouthing the words, someone standing at the back to see better. Then his gaze stopped on row 7, on Tom Richardson's face. On the faded green military jacket with patches that Sinatra recognized immediately. 82nd Airborne, Bronze Star, purple ribbons that told stories of sacrifice and courage. Sinatra had always felt connected to the military. He'd performed for troops during World War II through the USO, though he'd never served himself due to a punctured eardrum. That had bothered him his entire life, feeling like he hadn't done enough when so many had given so much. He'd spent decades trying to make up for it, supporting veteran causes, performing at military hospitals, never accepting payment for shows performed for servicemen and women. The music continued, but Sinatra's voice faltered. He'd reached the line about regrets, about facing the final curtain, and suddenly he couldn't sing. Because looking at Tom Richardson, he saw something that broke his heart. The quiet dignity of a man who'd given everything for his country and now sat in an audience, as if his sacrifice had been forgotten by time. The orchestra played on for several bars, expecting Sinatra to continue. Carson's smile faded, replaced by concern. The audience murmured, confused about why the great Frank Sinatra had stopped singing in the middle of his most famous song. "Stop the music," Sinatra said quietly, then louder. "Stop the music, please." The conductor, bewildered, brought the orchestra to a halt. The silence in Studio 6B was absolute. 200 people held their breath. Network executives leaned forward, wondering if they were witnessing a medical emergency. Carson half stood from his desk, ready to help if needed. Sinatra kept his eyes on Tom Richardson, the gentleman in row 7, in the military jacket. "Sir, would you please stand up?" Tom looked around, confused, thinking Sinatra must be talking about someone else. But people in nearby seats pointed at him, and his daughter Sarah, watching from backstage, put her hand over her mouth in shock. Slowly, Tom stood up. The lights caught his face and cameras swung toward him. On millions of television screens across America, viewers saw what Sinatra saw: a weathered face, humble eyes, the jacket of a man who'd served his country with honor. "What's your name, sir?" Sinatra asked, his voice gentle. "Tom Richardson, Mr. Sinatra." "Tom, did you serve?" "Yes, sir. 82nd Airborne. Normandy, June 1944. The audience gasped. Several people began clapping, but Sinatra raised his hand for quiet. He walked away from the microphone, moving toward the edge of the stage, getting as close to Tom as the physical space allowed. "D-Day," Sinatra said softly. "You were there on D-Day?" "Yes, sir." Sinatra's eyes glistened with emotion. "Tom, I spent the war entertaining troops, telling jokes, singing songs. But men like you jumped out of planes into Nazi gunfire. You're the real heroes. Not people like me who just sang songs." Tom shook his head. "Mr. Sinatra, your music, it got us through. When things were bad, when we'd lost friends, your voice reminded us what we were fighting for. You were there with us, even if you couldn't see it." The studio audience erupted in applause. Johnny Carson stood up from his desk, his own eyes wet. This wasn't just television anymore. This was a moment of raw human connection that transcended entertainment. Sinatra turned to his conductor. "Start My Way from the beginning, and turn up the volume." As the orchestra played the introduction again, Sinatra did something unprecedented. He gestured for Tom Richardson to join him on stage. Tom hesitated, but the audience encouraged him with applause, and ushers helped him navigate to the stage stairs. When Tom reached the stage, standing in his worn military jacket next to Frank Sinatra in his elegant tuxedo, the contrast was striking. But Sinatra treated him like royalty, putting a hand on his shoulder and positioning him beside the microphone. "Tom, I want you to hear this song the way it should be heard," Sinatra said. "This isn't just my way. It's the way men like you lived, with courage, with honor, with sacrifice." Sinatra began singing again, but this time with even more emotion. As he sang about facing challenges and staying true to oneself, he wasn't just performing. He was honoring every veteran who'd ever struggled, every soldier who'd come home to a world that didn't always understand what they'd been through. Tom stood beside him, tears streaming down his face. The cameras captured every moment. The pride in Tom's eyes, the genuine emotion in Sinatra's voice, the audience members wiping their own tears. When Sinatra reached the final verse, he did something else unexpected. He invited Tom to sing the last lines with him. Tom shook his head, but Sinatra insisted, holding the microphone between them. Together, their voices blending, one trained and professional, one rough and unpracticed, they sang about facing the final curtain, about stating one's case with clarity. It wasn't polished or perfect, but it was real. It was two men from different worlds finding common ground in music and mutual respect. The final note hung in the air as the orchestra finished. The studio audience rose to their feet, applause thundering through the small space. Johnny Carson stood at his desk, clapping so hard his hands hurt. Network executives in the back forgot about ratings and commercial breaks, caught up in the genuine emotion of the moment. Sinatra embraced Tom, whispering something in his ear that the microphones didn't catch. Tom nodded, his weathered face transformed by a smile that erased years of hardship and loneliness. Carson walked over to join them, his voice thick with emotion as he spoke to the cameras. Ladies and gentlemen, this is what television should be. This is what America is about, honoring our heroes, recognizing sacrifice, and remembering that music connects us all. After the show ended and the cameras stopped rolling, something remarkable happened. Sinatra refused to leave the studio until he'd talked with Tom Richardson privately in his dressing room. Carson joined them, along with Tom's daughter Sarah, who couldn't believe her father was sitting with two of the biggest stars in entertainment. "Tom, tell me about Normandy," Sinatra said, pouring coffee with his own hands, something his assistants said they'd never seen him do for anyone. For the next 2 hours, Tom talked. He shared stories he'd never told his daughter, memories he'd kept locked away for decades. Sinatra listened to every word, asking questions, showing genuine interest in the details of Tom's service and his life after the war. Before Tom left that night, Sinatra made several phone calls. He contacted veteran organizations, arranged for Tom to receive benefits he'd never known he was entitled to, and set up a meeting with a job counselor at a friend's company. He also wrote a personal check, an amount that Tom's daughter later said changed their family's life. But more than the practical help, Sinatra gave Tom something priceless: recognition. The episode of The Tonight Show became one of the most replayed moments in television history. Tom Richardson's story inspired a national conversation about how America treats its veterans. Within weeks, new programs were established to help World War II veterans who'd fallen through the cracks of the system. Frank Sinatra continued to perform for many more years, but he never forgot that night. He frequently told the story in interviews, using his platform to advocate for veteran causes. He'd always say, "That night reminded me why I sing. Not for fame or money, but to connect with people, to honor those who deserve honoring." Tom Richardson lived another 15 years. He attended every Frank Sinatra concert in the Los Angeles area, and Sinatra always acknowledged him from the stage. When Tom passed away in 1991, Sinatra sent flowers and a personal note to his funeral that read, "Tom taught me that true heroism isn't about recognition. It's about doing what's right even when no one's watching. I was honored to share that stage with a real hero." Johnny Carson later said that moment was one of the highlights of his entire career. "We did over 4,500 episodes of The Tonight Show, but that night with Frank and Tom was special. It reminded everyone watching that beneath the entertainment, beneath the celebrity, we're all just human beings trying to honor the best in each other." The lesson from that remarkable night in 1976 resonates today. Never assume someone's story based on their appearance. The quiet man in row 7, in his worn military jacket, carried more courage and dignity than anyone realized. Frank Sinatra, with all his fame and talent, had the wisdom to stop performing and start honoring. And in doing so, he created a moment that transcended entertainment and touched millions of hearts. If this story moved you, smash that subscribe button and hit the notification bell so you don't miss more incredible true stories like this. Have you ever witnessed a moment that changed your perspective on someone? Share your story in the comments below. And here's a challenge. Watch the video again and see if you can spot the exact moment in Tom Richardson's expression when he realizes Sinatra is talking to him. Let us know what you noticed. Thanks for watching, and remember, everyone has a story worth hearing if we just take the time to listen.